It's been kind of a stressful week, so I wanted to read something a bit more lifey, lighthearted, and relaxing, like preferably something you didn't have to think too hard about. So I ended up running through books 1 and 2 of Beware of Chicken by Casual Farmer on Audible. So kind of a weird pen name, I guess, but whatever. So the main character of the story, Jin, I guess he's someone from our world who I guess must have died or whatever because it didn't really explain anything, but he wakes up in the body of a person who was training to be what the world calls a cultivator. So I guess this is a whole set of there's like a whole set of novels that are based on like the Chinese concept of people who kind of train themselves to gain power and eventually become immortal and stuff like that. I will preface whatever I say about the story with the fact that I am not very familiar with Xianxia novels and don't really have that much interest in them either. I guess like I know about the general concept and stuff, but mostly from exposure to Chinese folk tales and things like Journey to the West. Anyways, so he wakes up in the body of someone who's training to become a master but is not considered by his sect to be particularly powerful. And this is kind of borne out by the fact that he was, or the original person, was killed by the person who was bullying him. And since the main character is not particularly interested in being immersed in that kind of cutthroat, self-centered, and like power-hungry atmosphere, he decides to leave the sect and strike out on his own. Like he tells the person who handles his withdrawal paperwork that he might intend to become a farmer. Like basically he wants to do something that will keep him far, far away from other cultivators and also preferably out of the way of like the monsters and all the other dangers, I guess, that plague areas in the world, especially areas that are high in concentrations of qi. So qi is the typical term used related to the energy that people use in order to access cultivation related like arts and stuff like that. So anyways, he sets out and finds himself like one of the places in the world that has the least amount of qi and does exactly what he said he would. Like he sets up a farm, and the work he does, like his goal is to build like a productive place where he can be a hermit by himself and not interact with anyone if he doesn't really want to. And it turns out that working a farm is pretty easy, I guess, when he has the level of strength and so on that he has as a cultivator. So he starts to build his farm, acquire his animals, and to build relationships with the nearby village and town. Like, even though he intended to be a hermit, his life starts to spill over into theirs and stuff regardless of his original intentions. And this is a very good thing since he finds that being by himself is rather lonely. Although things get a little bit more complicated for him when he discovers that a lot of the animals he has are developing higher levels of intelligence as the result of like an herb that has a lot of qi that he gave them, because it was one of the things he took with him when he left his set. But these are just one of the issues that he kind of has to learn to cope with. So book 1 primarily focuses on the building of his farm, the friendships that he makes in the nearby village, and the girl that he begins to see and eventually marries. And then also the beginnings of his relationship with the animals that gain sentience under his care and how the entire process happens. And then book 2 expands on this. Like, you get more into each of the characters that it introduces. In book 1, you also have people from his original sect starting to look for him because they have a letter that they're supposed to deliver to him. You learn a bit more about his own background. Well, not the current one, like the person whose body he has taken over, like that person's original background and connections with the sect that he left. And then there's also many sections following the rooster, which is the one of the primary animals, like the first one on his farm that started to gain abilities, like refers to as like the first disciple, because the rooster kind of sets out on an exploration / training journey, like where it's carrying out missions for their local magistrate, but also investigating this dance that happens all across the countryside once a year. So we have sections on that. Something I liked. So honestly, I think the only reason I picked up this book, seeing as I'm not typically interested in stories about people trying to get more power or like whatever, it was that he decided not to be part of that world. Like, I'm always interested in when people go into things like farming and businesses, things that are productive, and like seeing how they manage to build that business or enterprise or operation up from the ground. I think it was an interesting endeavor, and I do think this was lighthearted. Like, the writing style is relatively lively. It skips around a lot between first and third person, like as it moves from character to character, but I think it works okay for this book. And it has more likable characters than unlikable ones. Like, I actually really like the magistrate of the town close to where they live. Like, he's super funny because there's this dichotomy between the face he shows everyone and what he's thinking inside, but he really cares about being a really good magistrate, but part of that hinges on the fact that he really likes hearing people praise him, but he cares that it's genuine praise, like that people genuinely think he did a good job. So inside he often like freaks out about like whenever things might go wrong and so on. But yeah, I find him extremely amusing. Something I did not like. I think the animal character parts were not very interesting until like it takes partway through book 2 before it starts to be like more readable to me, because a lot of the early sections, like, they don't have enough knowledge, I guess, of how the world works and so on to it's mostly third person describing kind of childlike, I guess, interpretations of the world and the actions around them, and it's a little boring sometimes, I think, to read. So it doesn't really, like, their sections don't really start to interest me until you get to the point where they're like mentally developed enough to actually speak to people and stuff like that. Like, so that doesn't really happen till like the later sections of book 2. Like, there's a whole menagerie of animals, like they're pretty much building up like different representations from the zodiac on the farm. So yeah, I don't really know if this is an unusual example of this type of story, because I think I saw another one that begins in almost exactly the same way, but as an example of this type of story, I thought this one was fairly decent.